Top 5 plane crashes. A brief overview of the causes, course of events, and lessons learned. Just the facts, no sensationalism. A powerful lightning strike over Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport on a day in May 2019 was the beginning of a chain of events that ended in tragedy on the ground and in flames. Flight 1492 aboard a Sukhoi Superjet 100 aircraft, which was performing a regular flight, encountered an abnormal electrical load that disabled a number of onboard systems and disrupted the autopilot at a critical moment during the landing approach. The pilots requested to return and attempted to land in difficult weather conditions, but upon touching down, the aircraft bounced off the ground with a violent impact, causing the landing gear to break and the fuel tanks to rupture, which instantly led to a powerful fire in the tail section of the fuselage. The evacuation began energetically and chaotically. Many passengers left the plane via inflatable slides, some jumped out of windows, and airport staff and flight attendants tried to organize exits, but thick black smoke and flames made the aisles impassable and cut off escape routes at the rear of the cabin. The fire spread rapidly, the fuel and paneling burned at high temperatures, and the spread of smoke disabled electrical and lighting equipment, reducing orientation and slowing people's reactions. Rescue services began extinguishing the fire and removing the victims, but by then the fate of some of the passengers had already been sealed within minutes of the aircraft coming to a halt. Investigators arriving at the scene recorded traces of sparking and system overload, the start of a fire in the engine area, and damage characteristic of a strong impact with the surface. Records from the flight recorders and communications with air traffic control painted a picture of a complicated approach and pilot errors, combined with malfunctions that occurred after a lightning strike. The investigation proceeded in several directions: analysis of the failure of electronics and control systems, examination of the quality of technical maintenance and crew interaction in a crisis situation, and assessment of the actions of the airport's emergency rescue teams. The published findings revealed a complex combination of factors: weather shock, mechanical and electrical damage, and a series of errors during landing attempts, which led to a devastating chain of events. This tragedy tarnished the reputation of the new model and served as a reminder of how vulnerable aviation technology is to both natural forces and human error. The lessons learned were painful and swift: a review of procedures for dealing with lightning strikes, enhanced protection for wiring and electronics on board, and stricter requirements for maintenance and pilot training for emergency situations. Official investigations and social assistance were dedicated to the families of the deceased and injured, and in the professional community, the accident became material for training and simulations, where scenarios of failures after a lightning strike and the sequence of actions to minimize fire and speed up evacuation are modeled. The memory of those who did not return from this flight stimulated the revision of safety standards and served as a reminder that even with a high level of automation and modern control systems, humans remain the key link in preventing disasters. It is human attention, thorough maintenance, and hidden readiness for the most extreme, unforeseen scenarios that sometimes determine the fine line between survival and death. The survivors' stories contain scenes of panic and genuine courage. Some helped their neighbors to escape, others threw away their luggage, hoping that heavy bags would not slow down their rescue, while flight attendants, risking their own lives, pulled and dragged people out, sometimes literally pushing them out of the burning cabin into the open air and onto the concrete of the parking lot. These episodes were then analyzed in detail by evacuation specialists. Successful techniques and errors in the instructions that could be improved were identified. The issue of interaction between the dispatch service and the crew was also addressed. How timely was the transmission of weather data? How quickly was the decision made to return early? And were all algorithms followed when a number of systems failed? Many experts also noted that the structural lightness and compactness of modern airliners, combined with the specific location of fuel tanks and drive systems, contribute to the rapid spread of fire when a tank is breached. This has triggered a new wave of reforms in the design and planning of emergency scenarios. In addition to the technical aspects, the accident stimulated discussion of ethical and regulatory issues. The airline's responsibility to inform passengers in a timely manner, training the crew to act in conditions of heavy smoke, and testing the suitability of materials used for rapid self-extinguishing when in contact with fuel. At the legislative level, amendments were proposed to the requirements for testing the fire resistance of materials and for procedures for regular inspection of antennas and grounding to prevent short circuits after lightning strikes. There were also legal proceedings. The families of the victims demanded answers and compensation, while independent engineers conducted expert examinations, comparing data with the original design specifications and maintenance reports. Many questions were raised about the aircraft manufacturer and the companies that supplied the electrical components, leading to detailed inspections of equipment batches and stricter contractual obligations regarding quality and certification. The incident became the subject of lively discussion in the media. Videos from the scene spread across the internet, sparking a wave of criticism of a number of services and at the same time showing examples of heroic behavior by passengers and crew. Enhanced inspections and new evacuation recommendations have further reduced the risk of similar incidents, and revised regulations for the installation and protection of electrical systems have made aircraft more resistant to lightning strikes. Ultimately, the tragedy of Flight 1492 was a grim but productive lesson for the entire industry. The loss of 41 lives remains an indelible tragedy, but the experience gained has saved lives in future emergencies and contributed to the overall culture of air transport safety, where every detail, every screw, and every pre-flight check item is of crucial importance. UPS Airlines Flight 1354 aboard an Airbus A300 cargo plane became the subject of careful study by the aviation community after a tragic event that occurred in 2013 during landing. The aircraft, loaded with commercial cargo and operating a scheduled night flight, entered the aerodrome area in difficult weather conditions and was operated with navigation systems that no longer met modern requirements for accuracy and automation. The discrepancy between the instrument readings and the actual position of the aircraft gradually increased, and the crew, working under conditions of fatigue and high stress, found themselves in a situation where traditional decision-making and manual control techniques were less effective. When preparing for landing, the pilots relied on data from the onboard navigation equipment, which had limitations in terms of resolution and did not provide intuitive feedback on the accumulation of errors. In the conditions of a night sky and limited visibility, the slightest discrepancies in readings were critical, and one wrong decision led to the descent trajectory not being optimally adjusted in the final approach phase. The investigation later revealed that the equipment installed on board, although previously certified for operation, did not meet modern standards for automated control and correction during approach to the aerodrome. Similar systems were already in use on a number of civil airliners, and their absence increased the load on the crew at moments of high concentration and stress. The human factor manifested itself in the incorrect interpretation of signal information and the slow transition to manual control, which, combined with minor instrument deviations, created a scenario of unavoidable events. After the plane hit the ground and was destroyed, a large-scale rescue operation followed, and then a detailed investigation, during which the black boxes, recordings of conversations, technical documentation, and previous maintenance reports were analyzed. The findings sent a serious signal to the industry. A combination of outdated technical solutions and human error can lead to catastrophic consequences even when external factors such as weather remain acceptable. Based on the findings, regulators and airlines initiated a review of approaches to the certification of navigation equipment and requirements for its timely updating, and tightened requirements for automated systems capable of automatically correcting the approach profile when discrepancies between different sensors are detected. The main lesson was not only to upgrade the fleet technically, but also to rethink crew training procedures. New training courses were introduced on recognizing signs of distortion in readings, quickly switching to manual control, and coordinated action in conditions of information heterogeneity. The introduction of additional levels of automation is aimed at relieving pilots at critical moments and providing reliable correction algorithms that will work when data discrepancies occur, reducing the likelihood of erroneous decisions. In addition, the requirements for monitoring the status of onboard systems and the frequency of their updates have changed. Operators are now required to regularly check the consistency of readings, calibrate and replace obsolete modules, and document all configuration changes for subsequent verification. At the corporate level, there have been changes in the culture of information sharing and in technical maintenance quality control procedures. Checklists have been revised, and control over compliance with scheduled maintenance intervals has been strengthened. Legal and administrative proceedings added transparency to the investigation of the incident. The issue of responsibility was raised not as a personal punishment, but as an incentive for structural changes within companies and regulatory bodies. The memory of those who died and were injured became a powerful motivator for reform. Families expected not only compensation, but also real improvements in safety that would prevent similar situations from happening again. As a result, industry standards for landing automation were revised, and new requirements were introduced for the certification of data integration systems from different sensors and for algorithms capable of detecting and compensating for erroneous signals. In educational institutions and on simulators, this case is used as an example of complex risk. where technical obsolescence, underestimation of the human factor, and organizational gaps create a dangerous synergy. Pilots are now trained not only to follow the instruments, but also to critically analyze their data, quickly switch between control modes, and coordinate actions in conditions of uncertainty. There have also been changes in the approach to cargo operations design. Optimization of loading and weight distribution, the use of modern cargo tracking systems, and stricter requirements for documenting the technical condition of the aircraft before departure have become part of the new standards. The result was not only a technological upgrade, but also a change in the industry's mindset. Safety came to be seen as a dynamic system requiring constant monitoring, training, and procedural improvement, where every detail, from sensors to instructions, matters. This tragic event reminded the aviation world that progress and automation must go hand in hand with human skill and organizational responsibility, and that only a comprehensive approach can turn the lessons of bitter experience into real changes that will save lives in the future. Helios Airways Flight 522 went down in history as a tragedy in which a combination of technical error, human error, and a fatal chain of events led to mass casualties. In 2005, this narrow-body flight was operating a regular charter service from Larnaca to Athens. On board were passengers rushing home and tourists for whom the flight was part of their holiday itinerary. An inconspicuous error on the ground related to the configuration and testing of the air conditioning and ventilation system resulted in the pressure valve remaining in a position that prevented normal air circulation, while the indicators gave erroneous readings. The crew, immersed in their usual pre-flight routine and the upcoming route, did not notice the growing problem. During the climb and entry into the cruising altitude, the oxygen level in the cabin decreased gradually and imperceptibly to many on board. Headaches, mild dizziness, and drowsiness gradually replaced alertness and performance. The oxygen system alarms did not function properly, and the visual signs of depressurization were faint in the early minutes of the incident. Passengers and flight attendants began to experience mild disorientation. Some fell asleep, others simply complained of noise and fatigue. The crew, deprived of adequate sensations and with deteriorating cognitive functions, gradually lost the ability to make decisions and correctly use emergency procedures. Soon, the captain and co-pilot found themselves in a state where verbal communication and coordination of actions were impaired. The autopilot took over maintaining the course and altitude, as this system is designed to keep the aircraft in normal mode in the absence of control inputs. The aircraft continued to follow its preset flight plan and route, almost like a soulless automaton. Ground instruments recorded stable flight parameters, but attempts by air traffic controllers to contact the aircraft went unanswered. Ground services, concerned by the silence, began sounding audible and radio signals, which were not heard or interpreted in a timely manner. For about an hour, the aircraft flew in a straight line at high altitude without conscious control until emergency measures were taken by military and civilian air traffic controllers to intercept and escort it. As it approached Greek territory, fuel reserves were dwindling and hopes for a safe landing were fading. The pilots, who had lost consciousness due to hypoxia, were unable to perform the simplest actions to descend and release oxygen masks, and many passengers, unfamiliar with the signs of hypoxia, were unaware of the danger in the first few minutes. This chain of events showed how thin the line between routine procedure and disaster can be. One incorrect valve position, an oversight in the pre-flight check, and misinterpreted instrument signals turned into a chain of irreversible consequences. The investigation after the crash revealed a number of organizational and technical factors: insufficient control over maintenance, gaps in the procedure for checking the condition of the oxygen and ventilation systems, and incomplete instructions for the crew in the event of gradual depressurization. Court and expert proceedings emphasized that flight safety must be treated with the utmost attention, rather than as a formal part of paperwork. After the tragedy, changes were made to aircraft maintenance protocols, pre-flight checklist requirements were tightened, and crew training was enhanced to include recognition of early symptoms of hypoxia and step-by-step actions to take in the event of suspected depressurization. Rules for monitoring the condition of valves and pressure sensors in the cabin were also tightened, and airlines were required to conduct more detailed tests after repairs and maintenance. The memory of those who died has been a catalyst for reforms and changes aimed at preventing such incidents from happening again. Aviation safety institutions and regulators around the world have revised standards and tightened enforcement. In aviation culture, this case became a grim reminder that human factors and engineering discipline must work together, not separately, and that the slightest oversight in technical configuration or pre-flight checks can cost dozens of lives. Today, safety experts regularly use materials from the investigation of this disaster in training courses and simulations, modeling scenarios of gradual hypoxia, sensor failures, and misinterpretation of indicators so that pilots learn to recognize and respond to unusual, not immediately obvious patterns of problem development. The families of the victims and the public have not forgotten those who died on that fateful flight, and the aviation industry has turned the bitterness of loss into practical motivation to improve procedures, technologies, and safety culture, the understanding of which distinguishes a professional approach from formal compliance with regulations and makes the skies safer for everyone who flies and works in them. Despite all the technical advances, the importance of human attentiveness and responsibility remains an indisputable truth, in which not only funds and regulations are invested, but also training, control, and a conscious attitude to the small details of service, which in air transport mean life or death. The Boeing 737 MAX 8 experienced the deepest crisis in decades for one of the world's largest aircraft manufacturers when two almost identical tragedies exposed weaknesses in design and quality control. The first disaster occurred in October 2018, and analysis showed that software designed to assist pilots could, under certain conditions, misinterpret false data from a sensor and automatically make a correction that ultimately caused a loss of control. 5 months later, a second tragedy occurred, affecting hundreds of people, and confirming that the problem was not a one-off glitch, but a systemic risk. In both cases, the key factor was the Automatic Aircraft Behavior Correction System, known as MCAS, which was originally designed to improve safety, but was implemented with assumptions that did not take into account certain real-life failure scenarios and human reactions to them. Investigations showed that the algorithm's dependence on the readings of a single angle of attack sensor made the system vulnerable to single errors, and the sequential and repetitive automatic commands to lower the nose created a situation in which crews were forced to literally fight with the aircraft, which was deprived of the intuitive responses familiar to pilots. Another important component of the crisis was the lack of information and training for flight crews. Many crews were unaware of all the scenarios for the new system's operation and did not have sufficient practice in regaining control when it malfunctioned. As a result, the human factor, which is usually the last line of defense against technical failure, was demoralized and cut off from the tools needed for a quick and reliable response. The response from aviation regulators, manufacturers, and operators was swift but painful. All flights of this type were suspended until thorough checks of the design, software, and certification procedures could be carried out. The company produced software updates, introduced additional requirements for sensor redundancy, and changed training procedures, and began to interact more openly with regulators and airlines on issues of certification data transparency. However, in addition to technical corrections, the events have had serious public and legal repercussions. Lawsuits, compensation claims, parliamentary hearings, and public discussions of certification and corporate governance practices have emerged. For many observers, the crisis was a signal to reassess the balance between the commercial speed of bringing new models to market and the thoroughness of testing and verification. The technical lesson here is simple and yet complex. Safety must be designed so that the failure of one component does not destabilize the entire system. Redundancy must be real, not simulated, and the integration of automated systems into the platform must be accompanied by comprehensive and transparent training of crews. This story also highlighted the importance of independent testing and international cooperation between regulators, as global aviation is interconnected and a mistake made in one jurisdiction can have consequences around the world. Within companies, changes in development culture were discussed. The need for a stricter separation of marketing and engineering interests, the growing role of independent expertise, and increased quality control at all stages of the product lifecycle. As a result of the ensuing reforms and updates, specific corrections were made to the system architecture and verification procedures, and pilots received more detailed training on aircraft behavior in non-standard situations. However, the price of these lessons was high. Many human tragedies and a loss of trust that can only be restored over time and through consistent work to increase transparency and accountability. It is also important to remember the families and loved ones of those who died, whose lives have been changed forever. Investigations and court proceedings have sought to provide answers and compensation, but no legal decision can fully compensate for the loss. In a broader sense, the story of the Boeing 737 MAX 8 has been a lesson for the entire aviation industry. Technological progress must not conflict with basic safety principles, and commercial interests cannot outweigh the need for comprehensive testing and honest communication with users. It reminded the whole world that even the most advanced systems require careful commissioning and that vulnerabilities at the intersection of hardware, software, and human factors can have catastrophic consequences. Chronologically, it is important to note that exactly 5 months passed between the two disasters, confirming an alarming pattern. Identical conditions, similar symptoms, and similar human reactions to them. During flights, crews encountered unexpected and aggressive commands on the control surfaces, which led to instantaneous and critical downward deviations of the aircraft's nose. The control module, responding to erroneous signals, activated corrections that, by increasing the tilt, brought the aircraft to a state where normal piloting techniques could no longer quickly restore safe flight. In response, the global aviation community initiated major changes. Software updates, stricter regulatory requirements for sensor redundancy, mandatory crew training for abnormal situations, and stricter certification procedures for new models. These measures have reduced the likelihood of similar failures recurring over time, but the main significance of these events is that they have catalyzed profound changes in practices and culture within the industry. An important detail in this narrative is not only the technical nature of the failures, but also the speed with which society, regulators, and the manufacturer responded to the alarm. After the second disaster, which occurred on Flight 302 of Africa's largest airline, the global aviation community demanded an immediate analysis and temporary suspension of flights on this type of aircraft until critical fixes were confirmed. The large-scale grounding that followed allowed for additional ground and flight tests to be conducted, confirming that the changes made would indeed neutralize the previous failure scenarios. At the same time, it provided time to review the protocols for interaction between manufacturers, airlines, and regulators. This episode served as a lesson for the entire industry, reminding it that passenger safety must remain the top priority and that efficiency and profit requirements cannot replace thorough testing and attention to design details. The story of the Lion Air Flight 610 disaster, which crashed in 2018, is a grim example of how automated systems designed to assist pilots can, if insufficiently developed and tested, become deadly weapons against those they are meant to protect. During the flight, the aircraft, equipped with an automatic stabilization system, began to receive incorrect data from the angle of attack sensor, and a software module known as MCOS interpreted this as a command to lower the nose. Despite the crew's attempts to counteract the unwanted deviations, the automatic system repeatedly and intensively directed the nose of the aircraft downwards, creating a situation where the pilots were physically and psychologically opposed to their own aircraft. A series of actions taken by the crew, including disengaging the autopilot, intervening in manual control, and applying standard emergency recovery procedures, proved insufficient or temporary, as MCOS reactivated with each new sensor cycle and the algorithm's rapid, repetitive command pulses interfered with attempts to regain control. Technical analysis showed that one of the key vulnerabilities was that the algorithm relied primarily on data from a single angle of attack sensor without sufficient redundancy and cross-checking with other sources of information. This reduction in redundancy meant that a single faulty sensor could trigger a series of automatic commands that were incompatible with the actual flight conditions and the pilot's reactions. In addition, a design flaw was discovered. The system had the ability to repeatedly and sequentially adjust the nose down, even if the pilot attempted to compensate for these commands with his actions, and the crew's manual effort was insufficient to neutralize the cyclic effect. Human factors and information gaps also played a significant role. Many pilots were not fully informed about the details of how MCOS worked, its ability to activate based on a single sensor reading, and the specific steps that needed to be taken to stop the chain of incorrect commands. Training did not always simulate rapid repeated activations, and the psychological pressure experienced by the crew when the aircraft literally absorbs the automatic commands and resists the crew's attempts to regain control. In such conditions, human instinct helps, but it needs tools that must be worked out and fine-tuned in advance. Post-disaster proceedings and investigations also revealed systemic errors in the certification and communication processes between the manufacturer, regulators, and airlines. Part of the problem was a lack of transparency in the implementation of new features. The decision to change the software and certify it was accompanied by internal assumptions that might have appeared incomplete to an outside observer. As a result, the public, the families of the victims, and industry regulators demanded a detailed and independent analysis to establish the chain of decisions and omissions that led to the tragedy. The legal and moral consequences were severe. The families of passengers and crew members were left without their loved ones. The airline and manufacturer found themselves at the center of lawsuits and public anger, and the industry learned a painful but necessary lesson about the cost of rushing innovations without sufficient testing. The response was multi-layered. The manufacturer released software updates, changed the requirements for sensor backup verification, and introduced additional protective mechanisms to prevent repeated cyclic activations. Regulators tightened certification procedures and demanded more transparent documentation for new systems, and airlines increased crew training on abnormal scenarios, including sequential automation interventions and their impact on manual control. However, these changes will not bring back those who died, nor will they lift the burden of guilt and loss from their families and colleagues. The story of Lion Air Flight 610 serves as a reminder that modern aircraft are complex systems in which software and humans must work in tandem, and where the failure of one component can have catastrophic consequences if reliable safeguards are not in place. It is important to understand that automation should complement humans, not replace their decisions without adequate controls and transparent information. Only with this balance can we hope to reduce the likelihood of such tragedies recurring and maintain the trust of passengers and crews in the aviation industry. This tragedy remains in our memory as an example of how design errors, training deficiencies, and delayed risk awareness can together lead to the loss of many lives, and how safety priorities must take precedence over commercial and time-related interests when developing and implementing new functions. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there was a need for continuous monitoring of new features and a culture that encourages open communication about problems and protects those who raise concerns. Experts suggested introducing software audits by independent specialists, expanding the practice of failure simulation on simulators, and including in certification procedures the verification of scenarios where automation conflicts with crew actions. The memory of Lion Air Flight 610 served as a moral reminder. Design with error in mind, listen to those who work with the system every day, and change practices to save lives. It also required support for the families of the victims, independent monitoring of the implementation of recommendations, and continuous improvement of safety standards for all.